Welcome in everyone to another episode of the Real Estate Tax Playbook, where we discuss all things real estate, providing timely and precise information to real estate professionals looking to build their own customized tax planning playbook. As always, I'm your host, Evan Ross, Tax Director with Brown Edwards & Company, based out of our Roanoke, Virginia office location. For those of you who have not had a chance already to check out our website and familiarize yourself with our firm, please go check out the link to our website in the description of this podcast. On the website, you'll find information on our other service lines, service providers, and our office locations throughout Virginia, West Virginia, and Tennessee. So I'm excited to be back. I've got our guest for this month, Derek Cagnus with Foundry Realty, LLC. Derek, I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, Evan. Happy to be here.
Thanks. So a few technical difficulties to get this episode started, but I'm glad we're able to clear that up and get it figured out. I always like to start our episodes with a quick just tell me more segment. So we were kind of discussing kids earlier and school systems, and it sounds like you were just recently appointed to Roanoke City Public School Board. So tell me a little more about
your opportunity. I was appointed one of two folks to the upcoming new cohort in the Roanoke City Public Schools starting July 1st. I also have a 5-year-old daughter who is starting in the public school system this fall. So really interested and happy to have the opportunity to sort of be on the front lines, contributing to some of the community development stuff that, as we talk about real estate, we talk about tax, obviously, where a lot of those tax dollars do end up going to in a lot of the community building efforts.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have two kids as well, another one on the way. So, and they're all going to be or in the public school system. So there's a lot of value when you have some parents that care and are involved in that capacity. So that's cool. I'm sure you'll enjoy that experience, hopefully. So, or at least add some value. So
learn something, hopefully. But
yeah,
I'm showing would be gravy, I think. But yeah, let's learn something and hopefully do some good.
Is that a 1-year term or how long is that?
It's a 3-year term. So
okay.
A 3-year term with up to 2 additional 3-year terms on it. So it could be a long-term commitment.
Okay.
Could be a shorter term commitment, but it's got to be at least the next 3 years here.
Yeah. So they locked you in. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Awesome. I appreciate that. I'd like to give you a quick opportunity, just kind of introduce yourself, a little bit of background about your career and what you do.
Sure. My background is a little bit eclectic. I have an engineering degree, but spent most of my early career in financial services, particularly in corporate finance and investment banking. Most recently, I've been doing a lot of work in the real estate development world here in Roanoke in Southwest Virginia. My background on it is my family sort of has a background in industrial and waste management businesses. So we do a lot of work on the real estate side about acquiring and repositioning typically legacy industrial sites for next generation uses. We have one ongoing project here in Roanoke around an old foundry site. But additionally, my expertise is oftentimes more in structuring the financial side of those transactions. Sort of, I would argue, probably more differentiated in that piece than necessarily the pre-development work. But in this project, we're sort of doing a little bit of cradle to grave on the project entirely, but also looking at a lot of other opportunities here in Southwest Virginia, particularly in Roanoke City, to leverage that experience and leverage some of that expertise with other folks who have additional expertise in the development world.
Very good. Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for that overview. That's a good segue kind of into start the conversation for today's podcast episode. We're going to hit on the project you're working on now, the old Walker Foundry site, and also Opportunity Zones 2.0. So I think there's a lot of quality content we can share with our listeners today. So you mentioned the Walker Foundry redevelopment project. What's the history of that property? What got you involved with that?
Sure. So the history of the property definitely predates our involvement in it. The foundry site itself has been an industrial site for over 100 years. The most recent incarnation of it for the last 50 or 70 so years was the Walker Machine and Foundry Corporation. It effectively ceased operations in 2019, had a little bit of a renaissance during COVID. But in 2020, they had a deal with the city of Roanoke to sell a part of the property to complete the Roanoke River Greenway project. And as part of that deal, they went through a voluntary remediation program with the state to address some environmental conditions that they had on site. We began looking at the project in probably around the 2023 time frame, signed an agreement to acquire it in 2024, took it through a rezoning process, and then closed in April of 2025, began the real redevelopment work here.
Very good. I guess that kind of ties in with your history with the waste management piece. That kind of, I guess, loops in a little bit to the environmental piece that came into play with the greenway and the rezoning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I always tell the same joke, but it's that, my family's business is in organic recycling. And so, when you go to cite these things, our family's from Boston originally, but you go to a community or city council and you tell, hey, we're looking to open up a new organic recycling business. And they say organic and recycling. We love those words. And at some point in the process, they figure out that it's actually more like a solid waste transfer station where you're taking, yard waste and grind it up. And they're like, oh, just kidding. You can cite this in the city, but it needs to be like, here's the dirtiest, most contaminated old industrial site that we have. And if you guys can clean it up, then you can use it. So our family business for the last 40 years or so has been in that type of project where we're usually taking heavy industry sites, cleaning them up for light industrial commercial use. The family business that my father started was actually founded on a Superfund site just outside of Boston. So we tell the story of when we first bought and opened up the business, he was digging a hole to put the mailbox in, and the EPA showed up. It was like, do not dig anything in the ground. Like you can work on the pavement, but do not go into the ground on it. So we developed a lot of experience working with municipalities, working with state, particularly environmental agencies, working with federal agencies. So have a little bit of expertise, and certainly I would say more so a little bit of risk tolerance for these type of remediation projects. The Walker Foundry actually turns out, as I mentioned, they had largely gone through a remediation plan. So we were initially interested in it with the assumption that there was going to be some pretty heavy lifting on the environmental side. There admittedly has been less of that than as we sort of dug in. They credit to both the city and the previous owners have done a pretty good job of positioning it and getting it through a voluntary remediation program. So a lot of our work here has kind of been really more of taking the vision of being comfortable with taking an old industrial site that does have a little bit of environmental legacy and positioning it for a next generation use here.
Awesome. Well, how large is that property on that Walker Foundry site that you all are redeveloping?
The main site itself is about 8 acres. The foundry had acquired some surrounding areas, mostly to buffer their industrial uses. So the total acquisition was 12 acres, but the main redevelopment is on an 8-acre site that used to house the old actual machine and foundry shop.
Very good. Very good. I mean, I'm excited about it. I don't know how much you can share at this point in time. I know you said purchased it in 24. I think there was a news article or video that kind of at the beginning of this year, maybe of 26, that kind of spoke on what you were doing. But where are you at right now in the planning process? Have you started hitting ground yet? And has construction started? Where are we at?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we went through a rezoning process, got entitlements for what is called a new urban center zoning here in Roanoke City. It's a pretty flexible entitlement for both mixed use, commercial and residential. We applied for and got a grants from Virginia Housing to support what they call their workforce housing investment program. So we're pretty well committed and down the path now towards developing a mixed-use commercial and then for sale attached single-family housing development here on site. Details we're still in the comprehensive planning phase here, but would hope to begin doing a little bit of the final demolition work in July and then really breaking ground on the site work in a positive direction in the August-September timeframe. And then ideally would hope to be having the first units available sometime towards the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter next year. Obviously, in the development world, there's always contingencies, particularly on administrative side of things, but that's kind of the timeline that we're at right now.
That's great. Well, hopefully things work out. I'm optimistic that things will get rolling timely, and then you will have those some of those properties available early in 2027. You mentioned that workforce housing, I think, grant is what you said. How much was that, and how is that grant to be utilized?
So that was a $2.5 million award from Virginia Housing through their WIP, or Workforce Housing Investment Program. It's actually pretty interesting structure. So the way that we applied for it was in conjunction with the Roanoke EDA, Economic Development Authority, and a local nonprofit, Total Action for Progress. TAP, or Total Action for Progress, they're a local CDFI. And so the way that this funding works is that it's a reimbursement grant for us on the development side. So it ends up serving as a construction loan for us to do the horizontal site work. And then when we actually turn over lots to the home builder, we take a portion of those proceeds and repay that $2.5 million into a revolving loan fund that's administered by the nonprofit TAP. And then they use that to make what are called community second mortgages. They're effectively silent second or deferred payment second mortgages for eligible home buyers to purchase the townhomes in this development. And they're able to offer up to $50,000 per household as a deferred payment second mortgage that qualifies, because it comes through the CDFI, the nonprofit, it qualifies as a down payment for, say, a Fannie and Freddie traditional mortgage. So for a lot of folks, that gets them almost all the way home to a 20% down payment, where they can step into a traditional, conventional, conforming loan for an 80% loan to value, not have to pay PMI, not to have to pay FHA fees or anything that kind of goes on to stack to increase that cost of ownership. And then for the city, obviously, it provides a pretty big benefit of allowing folks to transition from basically trading what they were paying for rent to paying towards a home ownership opportunity.
Yeah, that's great and really interesting, because I feel like that's one of the large barriers to new home buyers is that initial down payment. There's a lot of other factors as well with the credit process and all that, but that's great that qualifies. That 50,000, I think, is what you said. That basically
exactly.
qualifies.
And that's the main emphasis of it. What I always tell folks is that in order to recognize kind of the degree of the subsidy that a conventional Fannie or Freddie mortgage has to the average home buyer, you imagine someone making $80,000 to $100,000 a year going into a leasing office and saying, I want to sign a 30-year lease. I want my rent to be frozen at the same monthly payment for the entire time. And if at any point in time over that 30 years I decide I want to leave, I want to be able to walk away, no consequences. There's not a leasing office in the world
They're not going to find stuff.
But if you can qualify for a conforming loan, which is, from a credit score perspective, is not particularly strict, but it is particularly strict from the down payment side. But if you can qualify for it, the government will basically give you that opportunity as to lock in your housing cost on extremely favorable terms. So from a locality perspective and from a development perspective, finding ways to enable particularly workforce development type households to access that subsidy is extremely important for community development. And it can kind of layer in, we do all of the awards and mortgages that we're looking at here on new construction. So it kind of repays itself over and over again, where you're providing these home ownership opportunities, you're increasing the housing stock, and you're increasing the property tax base for the locality. So being able to kind of stack all of those together, I think, is a pretty fortuitous cycle and can be a little bit of a win-win-win for everyone.
Yeah, it really is. That's significant for individuals as well as the economy and just the Roanoke area in general. So that's great. Thanks for sharing all those details. I imagine a lot of our listeners are not familiar with those workforce development grants or this type of redevelopment structure or those loans. So I will say, was there any other grants? I think the EDA also got a grant. Is that different from the workforce housing grant of $2.5 million?
So we also got a separate $1 million award from what's called the Industrial Revitalization Fund. That's another state level fund. That's specifically for the commercial redevelopment. So as part of this, it's roughly an 8-acre site. Roughly speaking, it's about 6.5 acres are going towards that residential development. 1.5 acres going towards a commercial adapted reuse project where there's about 16,000 square feet of existing industrial space that we're going to be rehabilitating and converting into a new commercial end use. So that $1 million award, similar, it's an award from the state to the locality and then a loan from the locality to us in order to move this project forward.
That's right. And that's commercial only, that piece.
Yeah, that's exclusive for the commercial side. Specifically for rehabilitating existing industrial buildings into new commercial end uses.
Okay, great. As far as the pot from the state for both the workforce housing and the EDA grants, how large is that, and how cumbersome is the application process from your perspective?
So the workforce housing program is relatively new. We were the second round of it, so it's second of 5-year rounds that were approved. It's about $15 million total pot for each application round. So I think the total is 75 over 5 years, if I'm correct. So we applied, basically in order to be eligible, you have to have a job creation event within a 30-minute drive, roughly speaking, about 30 miles of your project site. So we qualified because Wells Fargo had a really large operational expansion in Roanoke County that we happen to be within 30 minutes of, based on a couple of different factors. Typically the maximum award amount to request is $3 million. So we got a little bit lesser. Yeah,
You're at the high end.
there's another project out of Richmond that also got $2.5 million. Then there was probably almost 10 other ones across the state that got, smaller awards to round out that full $15 million award cycle. From an application process perspective, I would say that it was not super onerous. There's definitely a heavy emphasis on shovel-ready projects. So we scored particularly highly on innovativeness, the ability that the fact that we were using the funding to create a revolving, local resource through this mortgage fund. And then secondarily, because we were shovel ready and could demonstrate that, we were ready to put money into the ground kind of from day one. I think all of those are the big components, more so than the application process. It's really about, planning your project out so that you can put together a compelling application and a credible timeline for when you could actually bring these things to fruition.
Great. That's a lot of good information. I'm sure this is really valuable to our listeners. I will ask one or two other questions just on the Walker Foundry redevelopment. What does outreach look like once you all have the land, all the horizontal ready, and it goes to builders? What's the outreach to finding people that are qualified for it? What does that look like? Or are you going to be involved in that?
So we're not super involved in it. It definitely passes over to the home builder side from a marketing and responsibility perspective. What we do have a bigger involvement in is this revolving loan fund. So while that's administered by TAP, we are also a pretty big proponent of making sure that folks are aware of it, and that in particular that we can partner with employers to help access these funds. So we have, we've been working with TAP and helping to establish MOUs with different employers around Roanoke to make sure that their employees, who are eligible based on this income range, know that this is available, to be able to use it. Again, really to emphasize the economic development side of this, where if you're looking at employee recruitment, if you're looking at employee retention, that home ownership, and particularly if you can provide subsidies for affordable home ownership, are really powerful tools to build and maintain your workforce. So, when we look at targets for, again, households making, call it less than $110,000 a year in Roanoke, you're talking about nurses, you're talking about city employees, you're talking about teachers, you're talking about a lot of the essential workers that, frankly, we're struggling in Roanoke, as in many other places, to recruit and retain. And we think that this is a pretty good opportunity and pretty good lever to do that. So we're pretty involved in that kind of outreach. And I would definitely emphasize, if there are listeners or folks who hear this and say, hey, that sounds like a pretty cool opportunity, best way to kind of get involved would be interact with your HR department if they have an employee benefits or a employer-assisted housing program, or have an interest in establishing an employer-assisted housing program, reaching out to us or reaching out to Total Action for Progress or the Roanoke EDA to kind of say, hey, what can we do to make sure that our employees can benefit from this type of opportunity?
Very good. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that information. Yeah, that's great content. You can tell you're passionate about it and have a lot of knowledge as well about this whole process from kind of start to finish. What is the goal as far as having this whole thing completed? I know you said you're trying to have a few houses ready to go or lots ready Q1 of next year. What's the long-term goal to have this project kind of finalized?
Yeah, and there's obviously going to be contingencies based on uptake and sales on the outsale side of things. But this is the type of project, and given the site and that it's an infill development that can move pretty quickly. It's not like we're doing multi-phase to convert some suburban farm into a 1,000-unit development. So I would probably say anywhere from 24 to 48 months is probably the expected timeline to be completed on it. But admittedly, it could even go faster than that once things get rolling. And I think if we do our job on making these affordable, making them attractive, as long as the sales uptake is there, a lot of times these home builders, that's the main gating item for them, is not so much putting buildings up, but making sure that they've sold out units in advance so that they're not getting out over their skis on it.
Great. Yeah, I can't wait to see what this project looks like when it's finished in the next, hopefully 24 to 48 months. So awesome. Moving along to kind of our second large topic item. I discussed this back very briefly in July or August of 2025 after the One Big Beautiful Bill, OB3, new tax legislation, was enacted into law on July 4th of 2025. And that's the Opportunity Zones 2.0. So a lot of changes from the original version with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2018 to what we have now, or what will be in effect as of January 1st, 2027. So I'd love to just hear from you on that, kind of recap 1.0 and then just talk through the changes with 2.0.
Yeah, so we've been involved. This is more from a broader development side here in Roanoke, but looking at positioning the city and the locality to take advantage of these federal programs that are coming up. And I think the lesson learned from Opportunity Zone 1.0 was that broadly speaking, this is true in Roanoke, I think it's true in Virginia, I think it's true nationwide, that it wasn't really taken advantage of to its fullest extent possible. And with that said, there's still 2.5 years to run on those 10-year designations, so it's not like that the chapter has been written already. But initially when they were making designations, I think localities didn't have a great idea how things were going to work. It was mostly thought of as a business development, and so a lot of these were placed in industrial or commercial corridors that frankly turns out just to be relatively harder to put capital to work. The number one use for these is real estate development. It's just you can have a much clearer line of sight on how you're going to leverage the tax advantages, and particularly how you're going to meet the substantial improvement test and several of the other compliance areas around it. So I think this go around, and the other piece of it was initially this was a one-time thing, and it took 3 years to finalize the rules and regulations. So that by the time everyone kind of got their feet underneath them and understood what an opportunity zone was and how you could use it, a lot of the decisions were already set in stone. I look at places like Roanoke, like one of the opportunity zones that we designated here was an old historic district in the city where it's really hard to put capital to work because you have a lot of restrictions on development. I think if we had to do it over again, we'd make a little bit different decisions on that. But that's kind of what the Opportunity Zone 2.0, I think, really emphasizes. And number one, it's permanent. So we know hey, there's going to be a recurring 10-year cycle here. It's not one and done. That helps on a long-term planning perspective. It also helps in building institutional knowledge where we can have folks within a place like Roanoke across the board on the development side, on the capital and the investment side, on the tax advisory side, and even on the tax equity side, of being able to justify investing in, all right, how does this work? What is an eligible deferred gain? What is a qualified opportunity fund? What are all the different acronyms I need to figure out here to make this work? Investing their own resources to get that kind of institutional knowledge, knowing that this is going to be around, theoretically forever here, but certainly on a rolling 10-year basis, as opposed to just being a one and done thing in the original stimulus plan.
Yeah. To your point, I think back in 2018, it was experimental. I think the government just didn't know exactly how to best roll it out. He said it took a couple years for everything to get finalized. So, and maybe it wasn't communicated well enough. Just for our listeners who may not be as familiar with just opportunity zones in general, but that's a tax deferral strategy. Allows you to, if you have capital gains, allows you to kick that down the road, defer it down the road. The 2.0 actually allows you to, if you hold an investment for 5 years, for the 10% step up, and then 10 years, you eliminate any appreciation on that investment. Is how it works. And it's an investment, so it's an qualified opportunity fund. You get a K1, it's an investment. You're hoping that it's going to appreciate in value over time. It's a great way to defer taxes and invest in these underdeveloped and rural areas, Derek, as you were kind of speaking to. My concern, I don't know how much you've heard on this, but there is rezoning that's going to take place with the 2.0. I don't know if you've looked into it or taken much time, but my understanding is there's going to be a significant decrease in the number of zones that are going to be available in 2027?
So yeah, they've actually just in the beginning of April, I believe, published the new eligibility tracks. So there was a significant reduction. They made the eligibility criteria stricter, but I think more importantly, there was a rule in the original opportunity zone legislation where if you were contiguous with an eligible parcel, then you could kind of even parcels or census tracts that were not eligible. If they were contiguous with an eligible tract, you could just put both of them in, and they eliminated that rule. So now it is so stricter definitions of which tracts are eligible. It's still 25% of those eligible tracts. So for example, in Roanoke, we currently have 4 designated opportunity zones. In the new round, there's 12 that are eligible. So if we just hit the 25% mark, you'd be going from 4 to 3. We're doing a lot of work locally to try to position Roanoke to say like, hey, we should actually get more than that 25% because we are really, really well positioned to put capital to work on it. And, one of the emphasis is that the headline tax advantage for these is typically the deferred capital gains piece. But I think one of the things that is relatively underappreciated is the value of the 10-year step up to fair market value. And again, this is where the emphasis of these were initially created for, business investment. One of the big things about the opportunity in 2.0 and particularly applying it to real estate is that step up in basis based on how things are structured should also eliminate depreciation recapture. So you can hold an investment for 10 years, and then when you exit, you don't have the traditional exit tax that you would. This can be really, really powerful if you combine it with the fact that the same bill, that One Big Beautiful Bill Act made bonus depreciation permanent. So if you do a cost segregation analysis, you can take a significant portion of these year one. Additionally, if you're stacking it with other tax credit programs like a historic rehabilitation tax credit, which here in Roanoke, we have a lot of that. Normally, those you have to take dollar for dollar basis deductions for the tax credits. Now that doesn't hurt you as much because you're not paying it back on the exit. And so in a year one basis, when you're looking to finance some of these things, the historic rehabilitation might generate 20% federal tax credits on your qualified rehabilitation expenses. But by definition, because they're rehab and usually not super structural, a disproportionate amount of that will qualify as bonus depreciation. So now all of a sudden you might be able to take, 20% as a tax credit, and then maybe 80% of that, the remainder, as year one depreciation. That ends up making it a lot more attractive to a tax equity partner in something like a syndicated structure than it would be historically. So normally you'd be looking at, anything less than $10 million in a QRE or a tax credit generation. Big institutional investors aren't going to look at it. Now you have a lot more appetite from even just sort of, I would say run-of-the-mill type C corps that, are going to have consistent federal tax liabilities because of changes in the corporate tax law, and now have significantly better economics to do smaller deals to take advantage of this opportunity zone if they're willing to hold them for 10 years and exit tax-free, which again, like from the historic tax credit, that's a little bit of an extension of what it has historically been. The compliance period there is 5 years. Or for a housing tax credit project, like a LIHTC project, which is going to do 15 years anyway, these stack really, really well with LIHTC. If you're an opportunity zone, you're almost certainly also a qualified census tract, so you're going to get a basis boost in that. Makes a lot of those much, much more viable than they would have been previously, particularly if you're doing, say, 4% LIHTC as opposed to trying to compete aggressively on the 9% LIHTC projects.
I agree. There's a lot of opportunity here, and I think there's also a lot of education that people need to get up to speed on to really understand the advantage of this investment and what you can do with it. So, and thanks for reiterating the 10-year hold on that you can really eliminate with that fair market value step up tax consequences from that investment. I do believe the max you can stay in these is 30 years, assuming this continues to be permanent down the road. I think 30 years is the max as far as you can stay in these qualified opportunity funds. One other thing I'll mention related to that, I did not mention it earlier. So I mentioned the 5-year 10% step up in basis. There's also a new rural opportunity zone that is a 30% step up in basis. Now I don't know that that's probably not anywhere in the Roanoke area, but some of those more rural areas do qualify for a 30% step up after 5 years, which may be attractive. I imagine those are probably in your West Virginia, your really more rural demographics, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think Roanoke City, it does not qualify just given we're in an MSA, but certain areas, certainly in Southwest Virginia, Also, places that you may be surprised, like Danville, as an example, is considered a rural
Okay.
county.
Okay.
Rocky Mount and Franklin County are considered rural areas that, obviously are not in metropolitan statistical areas, but are also not, there is urban infill development. You can do this type of historic rehabilitation credit things. So stuff that probably looks a lot like the development work that people are familiar with in bigger cities, but you do get that bonus as well. And I think that those places are similar to Roanoke, are pretty well positioned. I think if they get their ducks in a row, could really, really benefit from attracting capital in a lot of these higher cost areas to these, these other medium or lower cost cities where there is still a lot of opportunity, and, putting capital to work can go a really, really long way in these areas.
I completely agree. And Danville's a good one to mention because, I mean, there's a lot of development going on in that area the last couple of years, and still there's new stuff that's popping up every day. So that's good to point out that that is a rural opportunity zone.
Yeah.
Assuming it stays that way, I think everything has to be finalized by 27. So I guess things could change, but that's good to know that as of right now, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, my understanding is that they will get locked in. So if their designations as a rural zone is good for the full 10-year period. So if they,
Okay.
if they're like the IRS published all of the eligible census tracts and denoted which ones are considered rural and which ones aren't. Only 25% of those are going to actually be designated. But if you do get designated as a rural census tract, then you'll be eligible for the 10 years, even if, if Danville goes through a metropolitan boom and has a million.
You never know.
Yeah.
You know.
In 2036, I think they still qualify for it. And I do, I try to emphasize, I think that Danville is a really good example in central Southwest Virginia of a locality across their municipality, across their economic development authority that has a really well aligned vision and that have executed really, really well on taking advantage of some of these programs to pull in outside capital and really put them on the map in a way that, for 100 years or so, they haven't been. So I think that there's a great case study. I would definitely encourage, anyone, particularly in local governance, to look at what Danville has done. It's not going to be the exact fit for everywhere. Caesars isn't going to build a casino in every small city.
Yeah, it doesn't work everywhere, but that's still a good model to at least they're doing something right down there, even if it's not a casino.
Something right, and it's worth. I think that the dynamic of what they're doing from economic development, partnering with local developers, pulling a lot of expertise from outside of Danville, whether that's Roanoke, Richmond, or Northern Virginia, to come there. It's something that I think you can replicate. It's a little bit of, you can take the pieces that fit in your locality and leave the ones that maybe don't. But it's doing a really, really good job of comprehensively taking advantage of these programs, state and federal, that are available to these smaller localities.
There's a lot of stuff out there. People just need to do their research and make sure. I mean, they're talking to their advisors, their accountants, making sure they're staying on top of all the stuff that is available. So I appreciate you kind of expanding on that. I probably talked for 1 or 2 minutes on that, on the Opportunity Zone 2.0 back in July or August. So I appreciate you having a conversation that kind of elaborated a little bit on that and just kind of spoke on the advantages and opportunities there.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we're centered pretty heavily here in Roanoke, but we think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities here to put capital to work, whether it's on a tax deferral basis, whether it's on a tax equity basis, that has the opportunities to kind of be double or triple bottom line. Where if you're a C corp, for example, being able to optimize your tax offsets, invest in projects that have a community development benefit, but also potentially invest in projects that are local and that could be customer generating and secondary to corporate strategy as well.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks for speaking on both those topics. Before we wrap up, I did want to ask, as far as the Walker Foundry project, do you see, I know you mentioned there was another large one in Richmond. Do you see that continuing to be popular in the Roanoke area or just throughout the state? Do you think that's something that'll continue on?
I think that there is going to be a very, very strong incentive for localities to demonstrate scalable ways to provide pathways to home ownership. I think that is a big political issue. I think that we have a lot of federal and state programs that support affordable rental housing, but they have been structured in ways that are relatively difficult to transition to home ownership. I think the realization that that's causing problems, particularly amongst the generations, younger than baby boomers, and sort of more acutely as you go down the line. So I think you look at the federal level, this is obviously a state program that is a very heavy emphasis on providing home ownership opportunities. At the federal level, you have, the road pathways, 21st century housing bill. I can't remember whatever the reconciliation is going to be called. I would expect that to get passed and signed into law. That's layering in a lot of transitioning opportunities for federal funding and federal tax credits to go towards home ownership opportunities. It's emphasizing and layering onto opportunity zones, so providing ways to emphasize if you can find pathways to use opportunity zones to eventually use, so you have to provide rental for 10 years, but transitioning ultimately to home ownership. I think there's going to be a very big reward and big incentive for localities and to some degree private groups, whether they're investors or developers or tax equity investors, who figure out how to solve that problem and deliver on affordable home ownership opportunities, that there will be a pretty strong alignment at local, state, and federal level to come behind and support that and both pave the way financially and administratively to really just to address the shortage of quality housing units and quality home ownership opportunities nationwide.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is a significant need and issue right now. So we'll see what the future holds. Well, we went over a lot of information today, both on the project that you're currently working on and Opportunity Zone 2.0, as well as some other topics as well. Anything else you'd like to share related to projects or knowledge that you'd like to share?
The only thing I would emphasize is, again, for folks who are listening outside of the Roanoke area, Roanoke is one of the kind of an interesting little gem or project site here where we've gone through a process of being pretty progressive on making zoning amendments. 2024, we got rid of single family zoning. There's a lot of opportunities here that I think folks in other localities would be surprised if you start kicking the tires a little bit on what is possible here, particularly what is possible by right. And so I would encourage folks, if you are interested, if you're in the development world or the investment world and you haven't looked at Roanoke, give it a couple minutes. It's worth the time. We're excited about it, and we can certainly evangelize it, but I would say it's definitely worth looking at and understanding a little bit of what this city and locality has done to position itself for growth in a way that is pretty unique, both in Virginia and I think broadly speaking across the country.
Completely agree. So before I let you go, do you mind sharing your contact information if there are folks out there that are just interested in what you're doing, what Roanoke's doing? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So the best way you can actually reach me just at info@foundryrealtyroa.com. And you can also reach us at the website, foundryrealtyroa.com, and you should find an about and a contact page.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Well, this episode was great. I mean, I learned a lot. I think our listeners are probably going to have a lot of questions after this episode. Not that it's bad content, but I think that it's just a very exciting time right now with what's going on in economic development and in housing development. So really appreciate you coming on, being here. With that, that is a wrap for this episode of the Real Estate Tax Playbook. I appreciate everyone tuning in and listening. Again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Derek, myself. We'd be happy to continue these conversations related to this Walker Foundry project, as well as Opportunity Zone 2.0, or just in general economic and housing development. So please continue to tune in on a monthly basis to our episode. We'll be back next month with another one.